It's Monday, which means you know what time it is. It's time to fight outrage, build nuance. Last week we had Andrew Yang on the Hopeful Majority. We had a fascinating conversation for an hour and it went everywhere. Trump, Biden, GOP. Check that last week's episode out. Today, the episodes are back to normal. I'm going to be reacting to an amazing interview. And today's guest is going to be Will Reusch, who's been teaching high school civics for 18 years. This is going to be his 18-year anniversary. I think he started last week, actually. And we're going to answer one specific question. What is the one thing missing in education today? I think you can probably guess from his title. There's a fascinating conversation. Remember, every week, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your content. And we're going to be doing a lot of coverage as the year goes on about the debates, about the primaries, about the elections. So stay tuned because we've got a hopeful majority to build. See you on the other side. All right. Well, there's a cosmic irony to this episode about what we should be teaching in schools. And I'm about to get to that irony, but let me tell you what sparked this thinking. So you'll notice my conversation with Will is actually pre-recorded. I was in Fort Bragg, California, which is this tiny town on the coast up in Northern California, about 3 hours north of San Francisco. Took the very curvy US 1 to get there. And the stay actually directly coincided with the Republican presidential debate. Yes, the GOP presidential debate where one person was missing. We all know who that person is. And I was just sitting there, right, on my porch. Sun was setting. Thank God at least I had a good view, maybe a glass of wine to get me through it. I was looking through and we were live tweeting the entire debate. I was like, man, I wonder how many people my age either care about this at all. And not just the GOP debate, I mean just the presidential election process or democracy. And if not care, how many of them even care to understand what's going on? And I don't mean that in a weird, condescending way. Like, I was genuinely curious. I mean, I'm 24 years old. 5-6 years ago, I wasn't following politics at all. And that's the irony of what I'm doing today. And the question that I'm specifically asking, the fact that I'm going to be talking to one of our country's foremost high school civics teachers who's been teaching civics for 18 years down in Los Angeles, California. And I was sitting there and I was thinking, I was like, 5 to 6 years ago, I mean, you know my story. I was a pre-med student. I was interested in biology. And frankly, I don't even know if I was interested in biology, but I was trying to both make, my family proud. I was trying to make the sacrifice of my parents proud. And the notion of doing politics or econ or anything like that was way out there. And I was like, there's this crazy problem. And Andrew Yang and I talked about it in episode 12, where we talked about how he would think about fixing the problems of today. And we came to this general conclusion through that conversation. Again, it's a hopeful majority. There are no set conclusions. We're always investigating, being open-minded. But the conclusion we came to was, it feels like the biggest threat to democracy today in our country is not necessarily blatant authoritarianism, but gradual apathy, that, in Andrew's words, we might slump into authoritarianism. And this question of apathy has really been on my mind. You think about voting rates today, they seem to be incredibly high, but I don't think they're actually high because people are really excited about the system or understand democracy, understand how our country works. I think they're really high because people are running away from something, as Vivek Ramaswamy would say. And the question becomes, if our generation is to think about taking the mantle, we can't have, 50 to 60% of our generation not care at all about the country or democracy. It's like asking somebody to invest into a stock when they don't know anything about the stock. And I think fundamentally the prerequisite to actually getting people to care about our country, getting people to care about our democracy, to put something into it, to help young people actually engage in productive ways, I think we have to start thinking about actually educating folks about our country, about our democracy, in basic civics. And this is where I want to take this episode. I was thinking about this from the ages of 5 when I came back from India. And I was born in New Jersey, but I sort of lived in India for a couple of years. My grandparents back on and off while my parents were studying for their jobs out in the US, and came back. We moved around every 2 years, lived in New Jersey, moved around there a bunch, lived in Staten Island. Yep. Staten Island dump. Sorry, I said it. Went back to New Jersey, then went up to Boston. And then finally I graduated high school, went up to California, in San Francisco for school. Throughout that period, I was just thinking, I was like, who taught me about the 3 branches of government and the civics literacy that so desperately seems to be missing in our society? Who taught me about, the Supreme Court? What happens when the Supreme Court rules on Roe v. Wade? Is it that actually abortions are all illegal, or is it they're rolled back to the states? All those complex questions that actually affect our daily lives. And I was thinking about that. So I don't think I ever actually received a formal civics education. It's like, imagine you're raised in a family, nobody actually tells you your family history. And then they're like, oh, by the way, when our parents move on, you're going to have to take over for the family. I'm like, what? You want me to? Of course I'm going to respond with either I don't give a shit or okay and like kind of just be apathetic towards it and not really care. Because why would I care about something that I'm inheriting when I don't know anything about it? And maybe I did take an AP US history class in 11th grade. I loved my junior year teacher. But beyond that, and even in that class, it was very analytical. Like we learned about the history of the United States, but not just basic, like how do you create change? What does it mean to petition? What is the electoral college? Is it democratic? Is it not democratic? What does it mean? What was the original intention of the Constitution? Was it set up for the government to be an overreaching entity? Was it set up to protect our inalienable rights? What does inalienable even mean? And that's what got me thinking about this conversation. I think that we live at this moment where you do polling. The Harvard Institute of Politics did a poll, I think it was last year, that said that 38% of young people are down on democracy or don't think that their vote counts. Well, of course they don't think their vote counts when they don't know how the goddamn system works. It's like I'm going to vote and participate in something I don't understand. And so I found through our amazing marketing director, Jessica Carpenter for Bridge USA, she found this amazing teacher named Will Reusch online. And Will has this message online. He's on Instagram. You can check him out. And he talks a lot about civics and he talks a lot about how we should be engaging. He talks about the culture wars. And he actually had me on his podcast. And I was like, Will, this is such a fantastic conversation. I want to have you back on. And the cosmic irony of this episode, the cosmic irony of this entire conversation is I was such an idiot in school. My academics were not my strong suit. I barely got into college. I barely got out, and the fact that I'm talking now to a civics teacher about answering the question that we both think desperately needs to be answered, what's the one missing thing that we need to be teaching our education system? Think it's civics, because that's how we get people out of that apathetic authoritarian slump. I thought there's no one better to actually talk to than Will Reusch. And this isn't just a liberal or conservative. As you know, this is about education. Now, here's the one big problem. Who determines what the civics curriculum is? You're seeing the school boards. You're seeing Florida. You're seeing what's going on with DeSantis. You're seeing what's going on the liberal side with trans ideology in schools, and people don't know where to take this. Will and I have a very simple take on this, and I think there's something very important that can be done in our society right now. There's a difference between ideological assessments of what our democracy ought to look like to answer those basic questions and an objective understanding of what we mean by the United States. That's what this topic is about, civics. I don't mean whether or not you should be teaching gender ideology in schools. What I'm talking about is we should probably teach our students what the branches of government are. I mean, I'm going very simple. You're like, Manu, this is obfuscating all the culture wars. I want to hear what the school boards have to say. I want to hear what's going on in DeSantis. Should we be teaching AP African American history? No, this is way more basic than that, folks. This is literally, I'm talking citizens, like my parents that immigrate to the country. When they become citizens, they have to answer a basic citizenship test. Like, when was the Constitution written? What is the Declaration of Independence? What's the difference between 1776 and the Articles of Confederation? Basic questions. We don't have the answers to those questions. People are becoming citizens, don't understand what's going on. That's what I'm talking about. So we can have that conversation. And the hopeful majority is about laying the foundation for the future of our country to thrive, for us to recognize that for a population to be educated, as Thomas Jefferson said, he wanted to be remembered for education. Education is the fundamental guardrail against tyranny, against authoritarianism, against a fight on our liberty. Because if a population is educated and understands how we move forward, then we buy into the system. And how do you get people to get really excited about our politics, to get really excited about our democracy, to understand that while they're going to STEM, that democracy still matters? Well, it's to learn about the damn democracy. And that's what this episode is going to be on. Let's see. Will Reusch, excited for this conversation. See you there. All right, Will, welcome to the Hopeful Majority, sir.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's good to see you.
Do you already feel more hopeful?
We'll see. The jury's still out.
That's an honest answer. So for the audience that doesn't know, you and I recorded a conversation on your podcast earlier that'll probably release around this time. And the way that I learned about your background and your work was actually through a mutual friend, Jess Carpenter, who runs Bridge USA's marketing. She found your profile and found all the influencing that you're doing online and in the world. Just for the people and for the folks, could you give a little bit of your background and just like what brought you where you are today? What do you actually do? And what sort of brings you to the stuff that you're up to these days?
Yeah. So tomorrow, actually, I start the first day of my 18th year in the classroom as a high school social studies teacher. I always kind of just resonated more with the older kids, and in most of the states, I grew up in Pennsylvania. Now I teach in California. The social studies that's required for the seniors is government economics. So I was like, all right, so I'm going to teach government. So I've been teaching government in a high school classroom for going on. This is my 18th year. A couple of years ago, probably like 2015 or so, when the kind of culture war started to ramp up with stuff happening at Yale with Nick Christakis and Evergreen College with Brett Weinstein and stuff like that. Jordan Peterson. I was like, oh, this is really interesting. This kind of like culture war issue seems like it's going to be coming to the K through 12 area as well. So I started talking about it pretty openly just in my classroom and just like addressing these issues. And then my wife, who does a lot of social media marketing stuff, was like, you should put your classroom online. Started an Instagram page. I was like, that's odd. Talking to my phone, I felt weird talking to my phone, but as soon as I framed it as it's an extension of my classroom, then I was like, okay, let's go. And then I started an Instagram and I started a podcast on viewpoint diversity, and it's just kind of grown from there.
So what specifically about those events with Nick Christakis, with Brett Weinstein, all of those folks? What really got you going with regards to that? Why specifically did you feel like you wanted to do something around that?
Yeah, it seemed like an obvious disregard for the fundamental ideas of America. You know, when I wasn't like a social studies buff, I'm not like a history buff, but when you teach it, you start learning about it. And when you teach the Constitution for, 15 years straight, you start to really understand the values of it, the values of freedom of speech and stuff like that. And then when I was seeing these elite colleges completely disregarding the importance of freedom of speech. And then, I studied history and the importance of the ACLU and the civil rights movement and freedom of speech and everything like that. It seemed just obviously against those things. So I was like, all right, well, then I got to speak up. And I looked left, looked right, and very few, if any, high school teachers, K through 12 teachers were talking about it, were addressing it. They were all on the side of like, this is important, this is good, this is, good to shut down hate speech and stuff like that without any kind of like acknowledgement of the potential dangers of it. So again, I looked left, looked right, no one was doing it. So I was like, I guess I'll do it.
But that's not easy to do. Like when you and I were talking, the question that I kept wanting to ask you was, your life probably would be much more simpler not being an influencer on Instagram and extending your classroom online and probably taking all the incoming flack. It probably would have just been easy to go along or just not say anything. What about the culture war issue regarding like hate speech and around these cancellations really got to you or gave you sort of the moral impulse to say, you know what, I'm going to actually take the risk and go out there?
Yeah, so it is. I have some friends that are like tough guys, like Green Berets, Navy SEAL types, and when they see me saying stuff like, they're like, "Wow, you're really brave." I'm like, "What, brave? hold on."
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
there's levels to this. What it is this is actually an interesting like metaphor. Is when I don't get poison ivy. My dad doesn't get it. My sister doesn't get it. So when we were kids,
You don't
and
get
the
poison
football,
ivy?
I don't get poison ivy. Like I can
Yeah.
rub it on my skin, I don't get any rash.
Okay.
It's odd. So when we were kids and the football would roll into the poison ivy, they'd be like, all right, Reusch, go get it. And I just go in and get it. And I was kind of immune to it. So when I noticed the stuff happening in the K through 12 realm, uh, what it is I have a wife who's an entrepreneur. She makes more money than I do. So financially, we're secure. And then I ended up teaching starting in 2014. I ended up teaching at a very unique private school, modern Orthodox Jewish private school, actually, that really embraces these ideas of freedom of speech and leave no stone unturned when it comes to education. So my job is secure. So because of that, I'm kind of immune to the cancellation. I get letters sent to my school sometimes, but my school supports me. The community supports me. The students like me. The parents like me. The administration likes me. So they let me do my at least for now. They let me do my thing, and I think that's a big reason. Is like the barriers that were in front of me were less than a lot of other high school teachers that I think feel the same way.
So what I'm really curious about is trying to understand what it's like to teach civics at this moment. But before we go there, what gives you sort of the would you say when you're in the community, when you're in the classroom, people are supporting you and saying, "Hey, get out there, do this," or that we'll back you. It does feel like we're in this weird moment where these values seem to be more conservative. I mean, you and I talked about how free speech and, saying that hate speech is not free speech, it seems to be more of the liberal thing to say today. Like, do you think that these values are politicized right now? Do you feel a sense that when you walk into the classroom that students might feel like you're more of a conservative, or you might be on this side or that side? Like, how have you navigated this moment? And how do you feel like you need to stand up for these values that are just values and they're not necessarily political?
Yeah, I do get that. I get students telling me like, "Oh, so you're like a really right wing. You're a Republican." I'm like, "I've actually never voted Republican. Nothing against Republicans. I've never voted Republican. I voted actually Republican in the local elections because I'm in Los
Mhm.
Angeles and I like balance. If I was
Yeah.
in Alabama, I'm sure I'd vote Democrat. But I get that for that reason. Like these ideas seem to be aligned with conservatism, and I don't think they are. The way that I address it is through curiosity. I just ask a lot of questions. Like
Hmm.
I am strongly against the war on drugs. Is that conservative?
Hmm.
Like I mean, I have a bunch of stances that are kind of in the middle. So I just ask a lot of questions. What makes you think that? How do you define hate speech? If you say you hate Donald Trump, is that hate speech? Like how do you? So I start asking questions, and then in that process, my students or parents or whoever it is, they have to contend with those questions. And what I found is they largely haven't given it a lot of thought.
How do you respond to the question that you, as like a straight white person, has the privilege to, engage in free speech and discourse, while those that are specifically on the edge of an issue or actually are at stake with a certain issue don't have the capacity? Like, how do you deal with that?
I get that a lot. Yeah, because I'm like
Yeah.
every I'm like the intersectionality matrix. I'm like every oppressor. Which I really am.
You
I'm
are
like
chief. You are the COO. You are chief oppressing officer.
I really like have those things because I'm white. My 23andMe is ridiculous. It's like 99.6% German or something like that. I'm
Yeah.
tall. I'm like symmetrical. Like I fit a lot of these like things that I look like whatever a bad guy, like a villain or something like that nowadays in movies. But
How does it feel like to walk around society looking like a villain? Will?
I don't know. It's ridiculous. But I guess it's a couple of things that I have a different attempt. So it depends on who I'm talking to. If I'm talking to like a white liberal person, might be a little bit different than if I talk to like a black progressive or something like that. But a couple of things. One is like if someone else was saying what I'm saying, how would that resonate? If I was like a black trans person or something like that, but saying these exact same things,
Hmm.
how would that feel? Or I point them towards people. That's the cool thing about having my podcast. If I had all these different people on my podcast who are like, you know, the whole spectrum, like I've had really progressive, trans people, really conservative trans people. I've had, like just whatever mix it is, like I
Yeah.
asked them if Thomas Sowell or Glenn Lowry or someone like that, Coleman Hughes has these certain viewpoints, Ian Rowe, who I had on my podcast, has these certain
Yeah.
viewpoints. What about that? Like, if you're just going after me, attacking me because of my like immutable characteristics, why not just go after my ideas?
Hmm.
And like, I also have to acknowledge that, like, yeah, that's probably true. It's probably true that I can take these stances because of my personal life experiences and things like that. That's probably true as well. But
Yeah.
like, we still have to contend with what I'm saying.
Yep, yep. Well, I mean, for those of the that are just listening, I put on a jacket. Well, one, because I'm just freezing my ass off right now in Northern California, but two is what's interesting about just being able to put on a jacket is there are certain immutable traits that you can't do anything about, and yet you have to operate and walk in society in a way in which I could never put on a jacket, or I can't take. You can't take off your color, right? You can't take off the social hierarchy that you're in or the position you're in. So when a student is sitting there, right, in the classroom, and let's say they see your clip, they see a clip that's going around. Let's say it's doing really well, and let's say it's like one of the recent clips that have been focused on a specific culture war issue where you're trying to walk what you would say is a middle of the road position. Do you feel like that interrupts their ability to learn in the classroom environment? And how do you navigate that specifically? Because I would imagine when I was in high school and like I had a cool teacher like you and he was a freaking influencer online, I'd be like, man, this dude's the shit. Like how do you navigate just a
Yeah.
classroom environment?
It's weird because, like, as far as school teachers go, like, this is gross, but like, yeah, I'm cool. Like, if I was a club promoter, I wouldn't be cool. But like, the bar is just so low. Like school teachers are just such dorks that it is like, I mean, living in a world where social media clout matters. So my students are all like, they're concerned about how many likes and follows and stuff like that. I mean, I do talk to them about that. Like, why? Like, my why is pretty clear. My why is to promote what I promote in the classroom, get you civically engaged and bring viewpoint diversity and searching for truth and things like that. What's your why for why you even want followers and stuff like that? Because that wasn't my goal. It was just to, you know, spark questions and thought. But if something's like going viral, like I had a conversation like 2 years ago now, go kind of viral, and a couple of newspapers picked it up, where I had a conversation with 3 critical race theory teachers, K through 12 educators and advocates, and it got kind of picked up. But as much attention as that gets, I just, again, lean into curiosity. If they say like, I don't like the way you handled that, well, what specifically? How should I have handled that? I've been really lucky. I haven't gotten a lot of pushback where people can pinpoint like I did this wrong. And then something, I'm not perfect, but like when I do get it wrong, then I admit it. Yeah, I could have handled that better. But I try to just address it head on. I don't like circumvent it. I don't talk about my social media and my podcast much in the classroom. I try to keep those worlds somewhat separate, but when they do bleed into each other, I just address it. I'm an open book.
Yeah. Yeah. What inspired you to be a teacher? Like, why'd you start on the teaching track? Now that you're about to start your 18th year tomorrow,
it's crazy.
Which is insane to think of. By the way, I'm 24.
Yeah,
I just to make you, really feel a little emotional about it. That's approximately 75% of my life. So what inspired you to stay?
You graduated in like 2017 or something?
I graduated college in 2020. I graduated high school in 2016. Yeah.
16.
2016 was a crazy time, man. 2016 I graduated high school, and then 2020 I graduated college. It's like, and now 24. It's like every 4 years the world goes upside down during my life events.
2016. I remember right after Trump was elected, I had a couple of students crying in the classroom, and there were teachers at my school crying, and I was just like, "Hold on, guys! Like, what is he going to stop you? What good in the world is he going to stop you from doing? So go out and do it, and then when he stops you from doing good in the world, then come back to me, and we'll fight against that."
Let's hold on this for a second. I want to ask you about the teacher stuff and why, because that's really important to me. But actually, there's such an interesting thing you brought up. I want to ask you. So you said that the students are crying, they're struggling in the classroom, right?
And teachers crying, yeah.
And teachers are crying. I remember when I just gone to college, and so it was my freshman year, and I remember professors were trying to figure out like, how do we deal with students? Like, some students are incredibly happy, some students are upset. Like, what was it like going into the classroom the next day after President Trump had won? It's November 5th, 2016.
Well, I had to eat some humble pie because the night before I was like, guys, don't worry, Hillary's got this.
Yeah.
I was like a textbook following government teacher in 2016. So it was like, follow what the polls say and follow what the newspapers say and look at the trends, and it was a very different thing. So I had to come in and say, I did. This sounds kind of gross and like boisterous, but like, or egotistical, I suppose. But like, I did what I think a lot of the institutions should have done, which is like, where did I get this so wrong? Wow, what did I miss? And that was also a catalyst for getting me down this road of like viewpoint diversity. My podcast and everything is like, I was missing some viewpoints here. I was missing why so many people, because I had friends back in Pennsylvania, they're like, wow, I've never seen a turnout like this. And I was like, that must be for the first woman president. And I missed the boat. And I think that's what a lot of people in positions of power did. And instead of going like, wow, where do we miss the boat? They just doubled down on like, it was whatever. It was a false election or it was crazy or he was manipulating, whatever it is. Yeah. But so I went in and I just tried to address it. Like I said, like I tried to address it like, don't let the government ever stop you from doing good in the world, pursuing what you think is the best route for you. So nothing's happened yet. I had concerns too. I was like, all right, well, there goes the world. It's over. This wild reality star has his finger on the button and he's a loose cannon and it's just all going to hell. And so, but I was like, let's pause. I'm scared too, guys. I'm with you because I don't know if scared is the right word, but there's a lot of unknowns here. I've never had someone like this in this position. But let's sit back and watch. Let's be patient. I think that's a big thing with a lot of like news stories is like, let's just sit back and watch it and not just like make assumptions about where we know it's going to go. Because obviously there's a lot of curveballs.
This is a recurring theme throughout the conversations we've had. I mean, last episode, as the guests know, we had Andrew Yang on. Before that, we've had folks like Monica Guzman on who talk a lot about curiosity and the creation of these values that you're mentioning. Is there a specific reason why you feel like you're more likely to be patient in these scenarios? Is there a specific reason why you feel like your instinct is towards curiosity as opposed to, I don't know, maybe being a prisoner of your ideology or ideas? Do you think there's some human nature aspect to it? Do you think it was how you were raised? Is it your value system? Like, what about you makes you more likely to be curious and open-minded and humble and patient?
I think a lot of it is I had a conversation with Eric Weinstein, and he has like learning disabilities, even though he's like crazy, smartest man on the planet or whatever. And his kids have learning disabilities, even though they're all like geniuses. And one of the things he said was, "You can pull my learning disabilities from my cold dead hands," something like that. Like, it's actually a superpower. And I was never a bright guy. Like, I didn't get good grades. I didn't try hard in school. I'm not like naturally very intelligent. I'm not dumb. Like, IQ wise, I'm probably above average, but like just in general, I just never thought of myself as like a high horsepower brain person. So what I did was I leaned into not knowing, being curious. I was like, I've been wrong so many times about so many things that why not just lean into trying to find the right answer and connect my ego not to having the right answer, but to finding it. And if you're trying to find the right answer rather than have it, you have to be patient. You have to take in as much data as possible to try and vet all that's out there to get to the right answer. So I think I'm actually gifted. I'm at a school now, like an elite private school that has a lot of people with PhDs and really, really smart teachers. But in that, you have a lot of ego and you have a lot of like feeling like you have the right answer. You're the expert. So whatever you have to say isn't going to help me. And I think that's what I don't have. I don't think that I'm right. I assume that I'm wrong, and I try and always challenge that. And I think that's why I lean a lot more into curiosity and being humble. Like, I might be wrong, but here's what I think at the moment.
Is there a way to have that mindset reflected in public policy? Because I think a lot of people's critique of the COVID pandemic was that, you've got these experts and these experts have certain opinions, certain ideas. And it almost seemed like a lot of folks criticize experts for having opinions that they thought were set in stone and now are backtracking in some ways. A case in point is something like the Wuhan lab leak or some of the signs around masking. How do you have a mindset of humility and yet still embossed in expertise out there? Because we do need experts. Like, I don't know anything about COVID or biology or anything like that. We do need to listen. And yet it feels like a lot of people grate really deeply against this notion that experts are just better than them, and they give this like condescending vibe to it. So how do you navigate being an expert and also being open to learning and mesh that into public policy?
Yeah, that's tough because, sales is all about confidence, and a lot of public policy people in charge politics is a lot of just confidence. Like,
Yeah.
the right answer. And that, when people are scared because of like a pandemic or something, like, you're scared because there's a fire in your building. The person who walks in is like, "I got this, follow me." It's like, "Oh, okay, let's go." So it's a weird thing because you can't be that and be, humble and say like, "I might not be right." That's a really, really tricky balance. I don't know. I mean, I'm doing it, but I'm doing it on a really small scale, and I'm not in like, the public sphere in that way. Like, I haven't been elected to an office where people are counting on me to be the leader. But I think admitting when you're wrong goes a long way, and I think just transparency goes a long way. I think people can, saying like, we think this based on this data. Here's where we're thinking, and we're going to try our best. Here's what it is. I'm going to try not to be wrong, but we might be wrong, but we're going to try not to be wrong. I think especially after what happened with the pandemic and stuff like that, I think that people will resonate with that. People will resonate with, I'm not perfect. I'm all over the place, but I have my ideas kind of, I don't know if all over the place is the right thing, but like, I have, like, my reasons for believing what I do. I'm going to try my best. Here's why we're leading. I think the lack of transparency, Manu, has been a huge issue with a lot of stuff, whether it leads into QAnon and conspiracy theories and stuff like that, is where ambiguities exist, assumptions are made. So we're like, why did this policy go through? It doesn't seem to line up. I guess they're bringing masks back now to like some universities and some like movie sets out here. It's like, why? It's just like, give me some good reasons why. And then if you break down like the data or whatever it is, then you have to kind of sell us that way as opposed to just because I said so. I don't know. That's kind of all over the place. Does that make sense though?
Well, the phrase ambiguities lead to assumptions,
Yeah.
and assumptions can lead
Talk
to
about that a lot.
conclusions, right? Let's take the other side of the argument. I'm hearing right now somebody listening and saying, "No, I want you to ask Will this," which is, you're assuming that everybody's capable of an equal level of critical thinking, or that if the government was transparent, that tomorrow everybody would feel educated, right? That seems to have like a more optimistic take on humans. And I'll take myself. It's so funny that you say that you weren't the brightest bulb in the shack. I barely got into college and I barely made it out. They barely let me in, and then they barely let me out. They were like, you know what? You might just stay here. And I don't know if I still don't. It's funny. It's weird to admit, but I don't think I've still read a single actual scientific study on COVID. I have a lot of opinions on it, but and it's weird for me to admit, but I don't think I've read a single actual scientific study. And so there's a big podcast world push to say, let's be more transparent, let's be more open. And yet we've got to deal with the fact that not everybody actually makes the most of transparency. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, like that's the thing. Is like if they tell us that whatever aliens exist, then some people are going to go out and start shooting machine guns up into the sky,
Yeah.
right? Like that kind of idea. I mean, that's very real.
Or it's like with your kids, right? Like I would assume, like my parents didn't tell me everything. They told me things because that they felt like I could comprehend and understand. Like when they would have challenges, they wouldn't be like, "We're having challenges." So how do you deal with that in the public policy arena?
I know how to deal with it in a classroom. So my classroom consists of kids who are very, very, neurologically and intellectually diverse. You know, there's smart kids and dumb kids, for lack of a better term. And so
Just
what
don't
I try to, yeah, Jimmy, he's dull. But what I do is I try to relate the material to something that they can all get. So it's hard, but you look for the common things that everyone can kind of get on board. The really basic stuff about caring for your family, wanting to find your own success, blah 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 blah. But I don't know if like the science rhetoric is really what you're going for. Like, I don't think that's really what we're going for. I think you have to break it down to simple bits. That's what I see my job as. I don't think teachers are the ones that hold the information, then can give it to someone like the sage on the stage, because we have phones that know way more than the best, teacher as far as like knowledge. Mr. Reusch, who was the, 22nd president? It's like, I don't know. Like, I have no idea. I can Google it really quickly. I don't see that as my job. The job of a teacher, the way I see it, would be to be a translator. So here's the information. Here's the individual. How do you translate this information to an individual in a way that makes sense to them? That's my job. So in a public policy standpoint, that's possible, is you need people to translate it to others in a way that makes sense to them. And you can do that through scaling of technology and stuff like that with people that have just a voice that resonates. Joe Rogan's really, really popular. Why? Well, I think that because the way he talks is actually very simple. He takes very complex ideas. He had Sir Roger Penrose on and like all these, Nobel Prize winning super smart people, but he breaks it down in a very simple way. I think that's a big reason why he's so popular, is he is also kind of like a meathead, curious guy, and he can break it down in a very simple way. And I think that's extremely useful. And I think for someone in public policy, I think if you can understand complex issues and break it down simply, breaking something down simply hits all levels.
Right.
I mean, simple ideas can catch the super geniuses at Mensa, and it can catch the people who are, working blue collar jobs with dirt under their fingernails.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about meeting people where they are. I don't know if you know Andrew Huberman, but he's a case in point of somebody like this. He launched a podcast in 2021, and over the next 2 years, he's become the number 6 podcaster in the world. And to your point, like, it's so interesting that you think about teaching as translation. as opposed to necessarily teaching, right? It's how do you meet your students and provide information in a way where almost it aligns with the principles of helpful majority. I mean, the entire reason behind this podcast was that I think most people in this country are aligned on how to think. They might disagree on what to think, but they might be aligned on how. They're aligned on behavior and temperament. I think most people are wanting to be curious. I think most people are open-minded. I think people want to have these conversations. The question is like, how do you create the norms for it? So here's where I want to take this next. You're in a classroom. We talk about 2016. We talk about Trump, and he comes in, and it's basically a wrecking ball. How was teaching civics before Trump and after Trump, AT and BT, for lack of better word? Like, how was it different? Like, do you feel like there was a difference at all in education?
Yeah, I mean, I think that because he was so different from like the status quo, like he never had a job in government, for example. But I had to educate my students on who Donald Trump was before he was a politician. I mean, he was. I have these clips of him like as like a guest star on all these shows, from Fresh Prince to Sex and the City and all this kind of stuff. He was like welcomed by rappers, and like he was like kind of like a beloved celebrity to some degree. I don't know if like beloved is, but he was like a funny kind of staple, just like around. Like no one was really angry with him or anything like that. So I just had to like educate people a little bit on who he was, also his past. I mean, personally, I didn't vote for Donald Trump, but I find myself defending him a lot, just because I think that there are. Here's the thing about Trump too that I had to kind of break down to my classes, and I do on social media as well. Is like the danger with his critiques is that they go after him for things that aren't true. And that's a problem because there's a lot to go after him for. That's true. I mean, he had all these people work on his casinos that never paid them. He, went into these poor communities and kicked everyone out of their homes and leveled the buildings to build some luxurious, compound or something like that. Like there's a lot of stuff that he did that was not good. Let's focus on that. Even as president, there were things that he did that weren't good. Let's focus on that. But instead they went off and almost like Boy Who Cried Wolf and focused on things that ended up not being true. And now that's just going to embolden his supporters and him to be like, see, what they're saying is not true. Something I tell my students, I ask my students, I say, how many times does your best friend have to lie to your face before you stop trusting them? And they typically say like once or twice. I was like, so why do you trust like news outlets or individuals several times? The Fire Festival, that whole thing. Like, yeah. These celebrities were like, go to this thing. It's going to be a wonderful party. And that turned out to be a disaster. It's like, if they promote anything ever again, you should at the very least be skeptical. Yeah. So let's apply the way we are with our best friends to these institutions and organizations that we don't even know or have a connection with.
If Donald Trump was forced to be your student and he had to sit through your high school civics class, what would you want him to take away from it?
He'd be tricky. He's so ego. I mean, look, I'm not a therapist. Can you imagine like a little like 16-year-old Donald Trump, what he must have been like? But he's a really interesting guy.
You could have saved the world, Will. You could have educated him at 16.
Oh my gosh.
God damn it.
Yeah, like Penn Jillette said like he doesn't like music. Like he's just such a weird, like a real, like I'm not a psychologist, but it seems like just a classical narcissist.
He doesn't drink at all.
Doesn't drink. He's a really good marketer. It really like seems like a self-centered person. Like I think he probably worked, I don't know about really hard, but because he didn't read like his daily briefings and stuff like that in the White House. But I think he wanted America to be successful, but I don't know if he wanted it to be successful for like the individuals. I think so he could get the glory. I think, but look, whatever. I mean, the Emancipation Proclamation was to try and recruit Black soldiers into the Union Army. So, I mean, does that take away from the good it did? I don't know. I think the way I would approach a kid like Donald Trump, if you as a kid, is attacking his ego. I think I've had students like that where they're right about everything. And the cool thing about being even a not so bright, the brightest bulb 40-year-old is I'm smarter when it comes to like life, when it comes to wisdom. I'm more wise than even a really, really smart, high IQ 17-year-old. Like I know more about life. It's just time. So sure. In that, I humble them about what they know. I just met with my advisory. They're ninth grade, but I just met with my advisory 2 days ago. And they were saying something like borderline racist. and about like Martin Luther King and the times and black people getting arrested or something like that. And I just like dropped all kinds of like facts about even during segregation and what the black community was doing during segregation, and the single parent household rate was really low, and all that kind of stuff. And they just didn't know what to say. So I think the approach with Donald Trump would be to humble him, get him to admit that he doesn't know everything, that he has a lot of room to grow and a lot of room to learn and listen to people. And I think that would be probably the best thing for him, is to be more open-minded, get rid of some of that. What's the word I'm looking for? It's like that like, I'm just getting a brain fart because we're recording, but it's like that where you just like, it's like ego, but it's like, I know everything. It's like,
it's kind of like a feeling of self-importance, but I know what you mean, which is that you're just always, you feel like you're on it always, and that everybody else, no one else is at your level.
Yeah, like just that element of like, I got this. No one else can tell me what to do. I'll look how successful I am. Look how good I am. And I have kids like that are good at everything. They're good athletes. They're good at grades. Blah blah blah. But luckily, I can take them down and like, you're still 17, kid. Like, you still have a lot to learn about a lot. And I think that's good for them. I think it's good for all of us to get our ego in check.
You 17-year-old get schooled a little bit. It's interesting. So you would say that the main thing that you would try to work with Donald Trump on if he was 17 years old is ego. Yeah. Now let's take somebody like a Joe Biden today. His personality seems much harder to read, I would say. It's harder to tell, although he's got a big life story, but he seems much less out there, at least from my standpoint. What would you do for Joe Biden if he was in your classroom?
So it's interesting, because Joe Biden at 80, who you are at 80 isn't who you are at 50, and it's not who you are at 17, right? Like, so it's hard to say. I think he is a politician. I mean, he has that, when he flashes that smile, he looks like like what AI would say, like make a politician in a lab. Like, he looks like that. So I don't know. I mean, he's good. I don't know enough, I guess, about that. I think for him, because he's crossed the aisle before, but now he's leaning more into like partisan stuff. I don't know how much he's even in charge. Like, I don't know how much he's making decisions and things along those lines. He'd be a tougher one to read. I'd have to look back more when he was like a senator and things like that. I mean, he supported things. I mean, even fairly recently, he supported things like, and he was against gay marriage and stuff like that. Whatever it was, 10 years ago. So I think what I would probably promote to him, and just thinking off the cuff like this, it would be to take stances. If you're a real politician, then I would say take stances that you actually believe in, be able to articulate them, and then defend them. And if they change because of new data, then you explain what the new data and new information coming your way that actually changed your mind. And you're not just going with whatever the wind blows. So I think for someone who's like a career politician like that, I would say like, show like a backbone about what you believe in and why, and then only change it with a lot of transparency about what you did.
So with thinking about these career politicians, and you think about these people that are like Joe Biden, that have been around for a long time and are often, it seems like, motivated. I don't know Joe Biden enough. I honestly don't know a lot of political figures enough to make claims yet. I've met most of them that are in positions of power. It seems like you enter the system as a good person and you actually care, but then it seems like the system sort of spits you out, and you come out like this weird transformed individual. Andrew Yang and I were talking about this in the last episode about how the system in some ways appears rigged in certain ways, or that his claim is that the system is set up in a way that incentivizes us to divide. It's all focused on profit. When you're talking to your kids, right, and it's civics class and students are thinking about service, or they're thinking about what they want to do with their careers, and they say, public service seems like an absolute shit show. There's no chance that I'm going there. And yet we need some of our brightest bulbs to be public servants. We have real problems to solve as a country. What do you say to a kid that's sitting there and says, I don't want to even touch that? And yet they would be a great public servant.
I think most don't. I think it's rare. I mean, who gets into politics? My buddy Rob Montz makes cool documentaries, and he made one about how Trump was inevitable because we took the presidency and we made it into something that had far more power than it was ever designed for, and far more celebrity and fame than it was ever designed for. So you get people that want power and fame. Like that's, and then of course you're gonna get Donald Trump. That's what he wants. He wants power and fame. Like that's the kind of, and I think that's what we get, not just Donald Trump. I think that's what we get with a lot of politics. It's like power and fame, and people who are good hearted and just, it's like, why immerse myself in whatever, the swamp or that ugly world? I think you have to believe in something bigger than yourself. And I think that's lacking in a lot of communities right now. It's lacking in a lot of people. You look at the data on how, alone and anxious and people are. I think a lot of that goes back to that, lack of meaning, lack of purpose, believing in something bigger than yourself. People aren't as religious anymore. They're not in communities and stuff like that, like they used to be, like we're designed to be. So it's tough. I think starting small and recognizing that. I try to bring my students out to volunteer at Skid Row and things like that, just to see, because when you see progress, when you see a lot of my students go into finance, or they go into some corporate job where you're typing away, and at the end of the day, there's nothing to show for it. We went and we built houses with Habitat for Humanity, and I was asking the construction workers. So I've worked some blue collar jobs before, and I understand this, but my students didn't. And I asked them what's the benefit of this? And the guy's like, well, I'm building this wall, this retaining wall. It wasn't here this morning. It'll be here in 8 hours. I did that. And that showing of what you did actually is there, and it's going to make a difference. That's huge. And even if it starts small, like ocean clean. I mean, I'm biased. I like Tulsi Gabbard a lot. And Tulsi, started because it was ocean cleanup. It was trying to stop the drilling of something that would poison a water supply. Those little wins help. RFK, really interesting candidate out right now. And he, as an environmental lawyer, tried to stop poison going into water and pollution and stuff like that. Getting those wins feels good. It taps into something that just having cash doesn't necessarily tap into. I think that a lot of kids go into the pursuits of finance and fame because it's something quantifiable that they can say all right, look, I'm successful. Parents too. My kid goes to Yale. It's I'm a good parent, I guess, because my kid goes to Yale. And I think you get those wins in a deeper sense when you see the purpose of it. So that's how I try to get my kids to understand the importance of engagement.
Yeah, I don't know if I've told you this. I didn't know you were a Tulsi fan. I spent a decent amount of time with her in May, and we might actually have her on the podcast. And what's interesting about somebody like Tulsi is, or you take a Yang, or sort of these unorthodox, heterodox figures that kind of straddle the line, are on various different sides of the political spectrum, or they just seem like they're thinking for themselves, which seems like a trait that's in short supply these days. It seems like they seem relatively shielded from the incentive structures of it all. It's like in social media, there's some influencers that are selling out to the crowd, right? Or there's audience capture. And then some folks like you who are just this is my lane, this is what I care about. And if you like it, you like it. If you don't, it is what it is. And I'm going to still try to sell to you, but it is what it is. What do you think makes politicians more likely to be susceptible to audience capture, to the crowd, to their label, to the party, and less susceptible to just their own morals or principles?
I think just it's by design, right? I mean, you're trying to get people. We're a republic where people got to vote you in, through a democratic process. So you have to, by definition, be liked. I mean, again, I spent a lot of time in high school, and who wins class president? Typically, it's not the kid who's the best at organizing budgets and stuff like that. It's the one that promises you all kinds of things. It's the most popular kid. It's the most popular kid. Okay, so you're
Kool-Aid
liked
out of
by
water fountains. It's the kid that says Kool-Aid out of water fountains.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's you say what people want to hear. You go around. You kind of flash a smile. If you're handsome or pretty, that helps. All that kind of stuff, just like president, really helps. So I think that it's just by nature, it's I have to be liked in order to keep my job. I have to get people to vote for me and like me to keep my job. And being liked seems to be more important than having, the right answers, because the right answers can sometimes be unpopular. Cutting programs that if you're cutting some sort of funding to something, that's never popular. Cutting taxes is always popular. So the idea of we're going to always be pushed to bring in less money, but spend more. So just keep promoting that kind of stuff. I think that just by design, politicians have to be liked. They have to be liked to the point where people go, you know what, I want this person. George W. Bush was voted because they said he was the one who people would want to have a beer with. Yeah. That really Obama. If Obama walks in the room, you get little schoolgirlish, like, hey.
Oh
Matt
yeah.
Taibbi talks about that in his book, in Hate Inc., how they were supposed to be covering, the candidate when he was running in 2008, and they were like, oh, I wonder if he's going to come over
They're
and
hanging
hang
with
out with
them,
us.
man. They're
That's
hanging.
Yeah, having that charm element. Bill Clinton had that too. I have friends that like have met him, and he had that, like, just, he knows your name, he knows everything about it. He's just slick. But when I met Tulsi, she had that too, but it just had a different feel. It felt very genuine. And I don't know, maybe it's genuine with Bill Clinton and stuff like that too. But
Yeah. I spent last week, I think I might have mentioned this on our podcast, but I was with Vivek Ramaswamy for a little bit. And funnily enough, I think he reminds me of, forgetting the substance of what he actually says. He kind of gives me Obama on Red Bull vibes. He's very eloquent, very articulate, but a lot faster. He's very sharp. He's to the point. And I'm just curious, like, when you think about these political figures at this moment, like, how many of them, when they're actually in high school, right, and they're like in your civics class, like, could you say, I can accurately predict that this kid's gonna do this? Because and where this question's coming from is, from my sense, like, I was never like close to class president or anything. Like, I've never held like, I literally was like this, like, I mean, we talked about this in your conversation when you asked me about, like, why didn't I go into investment banking or finance or whatever? Why do I do what I do? Like, I was this like pretty insecure, like chubby kid with like very little leadership potential. So like, do you find that you can track it pretty well?
That's tricky because I was the same way. Like, no one kind of saw, like, friends that I grew up with that are like, wait, you're on Instagram, you're like, like, I get
Yeah.
recognized, like,
Your
sometimes on
Instagram
Disneyland or
famous.
something like that.
You got the
Yeah,
point.
it's weird
Yeah.
because I was really under the radar. And my wife, who has, it's successful in her realm, it was kind of like that too. Like, no one kind of saw you, and you're probably similar, Manu. Like, no one saw you coming, to do this kind of stuff, run an organization and stuff like that. But no, and it's really hard to predict. And here's why: is I've had really brilliant students that could like, really smart, really, they're smart in all the ways you can be smart. Kids who can just like crack out a Rubik's cube real quick, and knows algorithms, and got patents while they're still in high school. I have kids that are super athletic and charming, but there's so many different things pulling on young people. When you're 17, a lot of things can happen. I taught in like a really tough area for a while, and there were a couple of, like, a lot of times there were girls, they're like usually like Hispanic, like El Salvadorian or Mexican girls who were really smart and on their way to the Ivy Leagues. And then they met a guy and they showed up to school, senior year or something like that. They had a neck tattoo of the guy's name, and it just fell off. And they were pregnant 6 months later, and then they never went to college. So there's a lot of things that can come up. A kid loves building things. He wants to be an engineer. He's building all these trinkets and all the kinds of cool things. And then some firm rolls up and says, like, hey, you want to come work finance for us? It'll pay you this amount. And he hasn't gotten, a lot of girlfriends because he's been, in his basement soldering stuff together forever. And he's like, oh, if I get a lot of money, I drive an Audi R8, then I'll get a girl. Then I'm going to go into finance. Kids who know computers and want to do like the right thing and build something, get into entrepreneurship. And then Facebook or Google comes along, offers them some money, and they just take it. It's really hard. I think the biggest predictor would be the ones who push back, the ones who don't follow the sheep, who don't follow the herd. I think that's the biggest determining factor that I've seen of like kids who are successful and kids who aren't, is not their abilities. It's more just their willingness to do what feels right to them and not go with the crowd.
It's that sort of contrarian nature.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think? What do you think about the state of civic education today?
It's almost non-existent.
Do you think? Yeah. What's your take on it?
Well, if you look at the state standards from across the country, every state, if you don't know, every state has their standards for every class about what needs to get covered, and it's covered on like an exam or something like that if you're doing like standardized tests for the state. But civics isn't covered in most of the 50 states. There's like electives, electives, like mine's an elective. There is a government and economics.
Yeah.
So a lot of states have 1 semester of government education.
I never had any, by the way.
No government education.
No civics. There's no civics.
Yeah. Okay. So you never learn like how many senators there are and stuff?
Sorry?
You never learned like how many senators there are and
No.
okay, yeah. I mean, so it's almost non-existent. And when I was given the opportunity, I've written a couple of classes. I wrote a cool sociology class that was based on the Simpsons television show, where we'd watch episodes and pick out like different
Uh-huh.
sociology ideas and stuff. So I've written a couple of classes and got them like approved for the UC system and stuff like that. But I was given the opportunity to do one, and I was like, "What class should I teach?" And I was thinking about doing a U.S. history class in 1968 because cool stuff, interesting stuff happened then. But then I talked to some people and I heard people talk about the importance of civic education. I talked to Ben Shapiro because he was in the community when he lived in Los Angeles. He was part of this Orthodox Jewish community that I teach in. So I talked to him. He talked about the importance of civic education. I heard the importance of civic education from a lot of different people that I thought were smart. And I was like, all right, yeah. So the importance of being a citizen, the rights and responsibilities. And I heard Jordan Peterson talk a lot about the rights and responsibilities. But it's almost non-existent. And I don't know, put on the tinfoil hat, it seems like it could be by design. I mean, if you are in a position, do you want a lot of younger people knowing exactly how to uproot you from your position and take over your spot? I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's an interesting kind of concept, but I think it's easier just to keep people ignorant. And how many people are ignorant about big issues that they vote on? It's fascinating. I knew someone who was an abortion, a pro-choice advocate, marched on Washington, all that kind of stuff. And she was in her late 60s. And she's like, oh my gosh, Trump's going to pull back Roe v. Wade, which ended up happening and stuff like that. But this is back in 2017, 18. I go, let me ask you, what would happen if Roe v. Wade got repealed? And without even hesitation, she's like, abortion is done in America. Abortions will be illegal. I was like, that's not true. It just gets rolled back to the state. She's like, really? It's like, yeah, Google it. It was fascinating. People have these really strong convictions about things they don't know. Guns is a big one. Do you know, they don't even know what a semi-automatic gun is, semi-automatic rifle. They don't know about gun laws. So I think that's a real problem is keeping people ignorant, because then they're easy to manipulate and get their vote. And I think that, I don't know if it's by design, but it's working out really, really well. Because if you have an informed population, then there's a lot more nuance, and they're not just gonna blindly follow what you say that sounds good. They're gonna ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, I mean, on episode 12, which is the last one, Andrew Yang and I we talked about authoritarianism, but one of the things that he said that was interesting was that it's more likely that we're going to slump into authoritarianism, right? That apathy actually breeds authoritarianism. This idea that, again, as you're saying, it's much easier to control and rule a society where people are not informed and plugged in than it is the other way around. It's also much easier to just scare the shit out of people that way. If right now the Democratic Party runs in neighborhoods and they're like, you'll never be able to get an abortion ever again, or Republicans roll into rural communities and say you're never going to own another firearm ever again in your life if this senator gets elected. And it's just the logical chain for that reality is nearly impossible. So the question becomes, how do you try to make civic education interesting? Do you try to make it fun? How do you do the entire thing so that when a student is coming into the classroom, they leave a classroom, they feel some degree of investment in the system?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of fear comes from a lot of ignorance. I mean, the thing about people who are scared of snakes often don't know the difference between a venomous snake and a non-venomous snake.
That's me. I jump like crazy when I see a gardener snake.
Yeah. Well, my wife is too really petrified of anything. Even at the zoo, she has to be 10 feet away from the glass. But she doesn't know anything about snakes. She can't identify them, anything like that. I think that happens with police officers. I think that there's a lot of ignorance about different communities and different the way that people are. So it's if you don't know about the population that you're policing, then you're going to be scared of things. You're going to think things are threatening when they're not. I have a friend who's Greek, and so family's just loud. They're just loud people. I have a friend who's a police officer, a black police officer in LA. And he's like, when I have a white partner and we roll up to a black family gathering or something like that, he's like, I got this because I know how they talk, essentially. So in that way, I think that we have to fight the ignorance. So it's gonna combat the fear is just learning more about it. How do I do that in the civics class? Is just taking these ideas and flushing them out deep. The first day, so tomorrow's my first day of school, and on the first day, I teach civics, then I also teach Gov Econ. First day of my Gov Econ tomorrow, I'm going to do a whole lecture on guns and the complex nature of stopping gun violence. And it's long. It's like a whole thing. And I have a slideshow for it. I think it's on YouTube, actually. But it's really, really complex. And I just want them to get a little frustrated. I have students tell me all the time, Mr. Reusch, I was certain about all these things. Then I took your class and now I don't know what to believe. And it's like, well, good. Because that's good. Yeah. Like you're not. So, by the way, the word I was looking for was hubris. Like that. Yeah. Like I'm trying to fight that. I think that's where a lot of it comes from. And I do a whole unit toward the end of the year, my civics class on unintended consequences. So you could have good intentions, but that could lead to terrible things. The road to hell is paved in good intentions. And I have the students all research examples of unintended consequences from, thalidomide, that medication that gave kids birth defects, to, all kinds of stuff, the lockdowns during COVID or whatever it is, the what is it called? The Cobra problem or whatever it is in India. Do you know about that? Like, like they put a bounty on cobras. So they started breeding cobras.
And they went crazy.
They went crazy. So the unintended consequences, I think that's a big part of the theme of my civics classes and my government classes is that, you need to keep your head on a swivel and look for all the things where you could be wrong. And that should be fun. Trying to discover how you're wrong so you get a little bit closer to where you're right is, I think, a big part of it. That's why that seems interesting to young people too. Like they like having these they like discovery. They actually do. They like learning about that kind of stuff. They like kind of having ideas that their parents or their older cousins or their older siblings don't know about. These little tidbits, these cool stories and stuff like that. They seem to like.
There's almost a certain degree of challenging authority to it. There's a degree of skepticism, and I think young people appreciate being skeptical, especially at this moment. Somebody like my age, you're born around 9/11, you go to the middle school around, Great Recession, you graduate high school in 2016, you graduate college in 2020. The sample size of American democracy is not boundless progress. It's actually quite the opposite.
For sure.
How do you you're going to walk into this class tomorrow in GovEcon and you're going to talk about guns. And obviously you're going to complexify. It's interesting that you think about teaching as complexifying narratives. The tagline of the show is build nuance, fight outrage. How do you teach anything today, like the gun topic tomorrow, without it being politicized? How do you go into a civics class and you talk about, how great the Constitution is, and then also its flaws? How do you give disclaimers at the start of a lecture? Do you hey, suspend your thoughts and let's actually go on this journey together? What's your tactic to approaching these issues with a degree of nuanced analysis where people aren't immediately jumping to conclusions? Because I bet it's much harder to teach a lesson and a student comes in, they're already locked in, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I actually start with the slideshow with the Epictetus quote of it's impossible to teach something to a man who already has it known or something like that, what he already knows, who thinks he already knows. There's a lot of quotes like that, but I am not like I said before, I'm not the bearer of the information. We are on a journey together. The journey should be do you agree that we should cut down on gun violence in America? Everyone's on board with that. Okay. How do we do that? I don't know, but here's what I think. And it's kind of cool because I remember what it's like to be 17. Because in a lot of ways, I still am. I still have that trying to figure out the world thing. I guess I'm an adult. I have 3 kids and a mortgage. So I guess I'm an adult. But I don't feel like an adult. Do you feel like an adult?
No. I'm definitely not an adult by all measures. But it
not by all measures. By legal measures, you are.
Technically, I guess.
My students would say you're a grown-up. You run a company.
My sister would very much disagree with what you're saying. But, it's interesting that you say, I know what you're getting. I want you to keep going on this thread of, it's the Stoics often said that the less you know, the more closer you are to enlightenment, because actually the more you know about things, the more you realize how complicated the world actually is.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Socrates I'm smart because I know that I know nothing. I love the Ryan Holiday books and I think they're great. Trump should read Ego is the Enemy. But I go in there and it's let's figure this out. And I say that I understand what it's like to be young because I already know the arguments. I know the arguments about guns. So the slideshow kind of, they're like, well, what about this? I'm like, click. It's right. It was the next one up. Like I kind of know where they're going. But we're in this together to try and figure out how to stop it. And if they say like, well, let's do a gun buyback program. Didn't Australia do that? So click, Australia did it. Here's the actual numbers. Here's what actually happened. Here's what it would look like in America. Here's the cultural differences in America. It's complex. And I think that if it's like, I don't have the answer. We're on this journey together. I have a little bit more wisdom than you. I have a little bit more knowledge maybe because this is my area of expertise. But you guys have angles. If we're trying to solve a problem, is it going to be solved by the person who just read the most books? Is it going to be solved by the person with the highest horsepower brain? Or is it going to be solved by different perspectives and different viewpoints, different people with different angles coming over being like, that's wrong because I experienced this and it actually went down like that. Oh, okay, let's bring that in. I think that's how we solve problems. I think that's what makes America so awesome is the diversity that we have and always to be diverse. I mean, what does an American look like? It's like it's all over the place. Okay. Like, what is an American into? What kind of music does an American like? Like, all this diversity leads to so much creativity, and it can be to a lot of problems. So I think that these culture wars are so unfortunate. The lack of like the partisan fighting is so crazy to me because I think about it like the left needs the right and the right needs the left, and they need to be working together. And it doesn't make sense to me that they don't. I get it, but it's wrong. If we're trying to actually solve problems, it's wrong. It's the wrong way to go about it. What we need to do is look at the different, the diversity in the way people think. I love John Haidt's Righteous Mind. That book was really an eye-opener for me. And understanding that people with different moral foundations are going to see problems that you didn't see coming. And that's really important. We should have listened to more people during COVID. We should have listened to more people during, before 9/11. We should have listened to a lot of different people, but we had that hubris and we had our blindfolds on. So to answer your question, I think that's how I try to approach these issues is really like, you might know something I don't. Sincerely, like you might. And I also offer extra points if a kid fact checks me and proves me wrong.
Interesting. That's cool. That part is interesting. I'll tell you what an American looks like. An American looks like a human with an oversized NFL jersey sitting down on Sundays to watch 8 hours of football that's about to start in 2 weeks and just eating nachos and just feeling like an absolute slob. That's an American, baby. That's an all-around American. That's about to be me over the next 6 months. I go into hibernation on Sundays, and that's what it means to be an American.
And it's David Goggins though, who's out running an ultra marathon on Sunday. So
no. I'm right.
Yeah, I mean that's
my tribe and perception of the world is right. Sorry, keep going. You were going to say something.
Yeah. No. So where do we find like the you on a Sunday and David Goggins? Where do we align? What do we agree on? And what does he learn when he's out, running? And what do you learn while you're watching TV? Like you're learning more about American culture. I think you're right. I think that you're spot on about like if you don't understand what it's like to be just like lazy eating, with Cheeto dust on your jersey, getting really into the game, and checking your fantasy, stats nonstop, then you don't understand a big part of America. And you need to understand that. And you need to understand the go-getter who's working a triple shift on Sunday so that they can buy, a nice new car and would be upset about, getting taxed extra because they were busy working and they're missing their football team playing. Like you have to really recognize all of that diversity.
You just pulled the biggest high school teacher move, Will, which is that you took my dumb joke and turned it into a lesson. All I was doing was just making a joke about the aspirations of football. And you had to turn it into a real lesson. No,
I take it all seriously. I take all those jokes that my students say seriously.
Important. That's important
because they troll me.
Yeah. Well, somehow you took David Goggins and Cheeto dust and NFL jerseys and then turned it into a lesson about polarization and tribalism. Here, I got last 2 questions. One is a question that we ask everybody. I'm curious about your take, but before that, why did you start to be a teacher? Like, what about teaching drew you?
I wasn't sure. I wanted to get into a service job. It was kind of pushed on me from a very early age that like
where in Pennsylvania did you grow up again?
Bethlehem, right by Lehigh University, like Eastern PA. It was kind of pushed on me very early to like get into a service job. Like that's like a good thing to do, being a service. So I didn't know what that was. I didn't have a lot of interests. Like I was I was a blob. I watched a lot of Saved by the Bell and Full House and Family Matters, and like that's it. I didn't play any sports. I was kind of a mess, and I didn't know what I was good at or anything. So I was like, I'll get into a service job. I had to pick something, so I was going to college. So I picked criminal justice. I was gonna be a cop. All right, I can be a cop. And the first day of class, the guy who was teaching it was a former officer, and he just had it was a really bad representative for police officers, who a lot of people think the stereotype of police officers. He was just like, this is a position of power, and you can wield that power, and you can ruin a single mom's life if you want to. If she's breaking the speed limit, you can. I was like, and I basically walked out of the class, never went back. Went to one class. So then I changed my major. I was like, all right, so I'm trying to help people. Seems like pretty basic. How do I do that? So I can help people, who are being attacked or something like that, or criminals, or I can get to them before they're criminals. It was something really simple. I don't have a great explanation for how I got into teaching, but then as soon as I started going down it, what I realized was like, wow, my teachers were terrible. Like, and I hated school. When I say like I'm not that bright, like I think I could have been, but I just didn't connect it. I looked at school teachers and I was like, you're going to give me life advice? That's essentially what you're doing. Day after day, you're telling me I should learn this. And I say, why? And they say, well, because then you'll be smarter. You'll be successful. And it's like you? Like, I don't want your life. You are not appealing. Everything about you is not appealing to me. School teachers are dorks. Like, I can do it better. I was like, I can do it better than you. And I really believe that. Like, the average school teacher out there, I can do better than you for whatever reason. And I think that's when I really started to like pick it up and like get into it, is like, the bar is so low for American education. I think there's a lot of teachers that mean well. They're soft-hearted. They're good people. But as far as like really bringing out the brilliance in young people and getting them to find success by their definitions of success, I think the bar is really low. I mean, of course, who wants to get into teaching? It's a tough job. You have teenagers just making fun of you nonstop. It doesn't pay well and all that kind of stuff. So I think I just realized that I could just do it better. And and then when you're good at something, you lean into doing it more. So when I realized I was good at it, which I realized was like first thing within student teaching, I was like, oh, I'm good at this. Then you want to do it more, anything that you're good at. So I just kind of stayed with it because I liked it and I was good at it.
Man, I have such deep respect for teachers and the way you're approaching this work. I mean, I think that teaching, it's weird that teaching is this job that, is seen as something where mid people go to. I think our smartest people should be teachers. Like some of the friends that I had that are now kindergarten teachers, like I would never trust my kids around them. Like I want people like you teaching, not like, my friend Joey that's, like you do not want Joey near your kids. And yet,
why is Joey teaching kindergarten? How many male kindergarten teachers are there? There's not many.
Not many, but it's teaching is like it needs to be prioritized. In Finland, I think it's Finland. It's one of the Norwegian countries, or not Norwegian country, one of the Scandinavian countries that teachers are the highest paying profession in society there. And so I think it might be Finland, where teachers get paid the most. And the idea is that society is prioritizing that specific profession. And I have like so many different questions for you about school choice. And I'm curious about, actually, one last question I got to get answered. And then we'll go to the last one that I always ask, which is there a certain part of your curriculum that you feel most trepidation around teaching? Is there a certain part of the curriculum that, given this highly politicized environment, where you're like, that one's tough? I have a tough around that one.
No. Do you know what's interesting is I would rather tackle the abortion issue than I would the textbook of how elections happen, because one of them is at least honest. Like it's honest about like the abortion issue and how complex it is. I think it's focusing on, they're looking different places. The pro-life is focused on the fetus or the baby. The pro-choice is focused on the woman. And you're saying like, you're taking away this person's life. You're taking away this person's freedom. America, freedom versus life. Those are equal as far as importance. And I think that's why it's a good issue. And I love talking about that. But if you're going like, how do people become president? Well, they vet this, then they do this, then they run this way, then they do this, then they do that. It's like, well, or they just, cuddle up to a couple of corporations. Like, how do laws get passed? That is hard for me to teach about how laws get passed. Because like, well, you call up your congressman, you tell them blah, 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 blah. They write it up. And then it's like, no, that's not how it happens.
Yeah. And then Raytheon calls them right after you call them. And they're like, here's $100,000.
Yes, like that's actually, the regulatory capture element of how people bounce from being a lobbyist to in Congress to being CEO, how our Secretary of Defense used to be on the board of Raytheon. Now he decides if we send missiles. Like, I always go back to that because that's the hard thing for me to, right? I do have trepidation about, like, let me teach the textbook when kids are like, how does the law gets passed? How does the bill become a law? Schoolhouse Rock style. I'm just like, oh yeah, yeah. I can't.
It's a tough one.
I'll take culture war issues all day over that.
That's fascinating. That's such a fascinating take.
Mhm.
That takes some steel, though. That takes some steel. Okay. Reason why this show is called The Hopeful Majority is because I think a big part of the world again right now in American society is craving the type of conversation we just had. People might not agree with everything we said, but I think people agree with how we think about things. And I go back and forth and I learn a lot through these conversations. And honestly, they're also just a good time to just shitpost. So with that context in mind, like part of the reason why I think you can find hope in this modern world is having purpose and like having a really good answer to the question why. I asked you about why teaching. This is a question I ask everybody from like celebrities to politicians to amazing leaders like you who are making a difference in your community. Like, what is ultimately your why? And it can be anything. Kids, it can be your wife, it can be a dream. What is your why?
Yeah, that's a broad question. I think at search for truth. I think that searching for truth, wisdom. I mean, I'm kind of new to like faith, and I like Proverbs and talks about a lot about like wisdom. And I think at the end of the day, we're all very lost. We are all should be humble about like what we know and what we don't. In the spiritual realm, the metaphysical realm, the physical realm. So I think searching for truth is a really, really interesting pursuit. I think it's a noble cause. I think that as inconvenient as it might be, shout out to Al Gore, like truth is going to be the best way to try and build a better world. Is just trying to understand what is going on, and that's the biggest why that I have. Is like I'm trying to get to the right answers. I'm trying to understand this reality that we're in. I'm very interested. I went to the psychedelic science conference, and I don't promote psychedelic drug use, but I do promote psychedelic drug research because it seems like there's a lot there about understanding reality and stuff. So there's a lot to it, a lot of layers to reality. I think searching for truth is a really noble cause for me, and I think it's a good place to set it up for my own children and everything, is to have a better understanding of the world. If we better understand it, then we can make the most out of it in the way that you see, the most moral way, I suppose.
Well, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for being on. I would say that this is probably one of the most fun conversations I've had, one of the most engaging conversations. I know that you and I could go back and forth, and as the hopeful majority grows, I'd love to have you back on. But thank you for being on, and thank you for the work that you're doing. And I hope the folks enjoyed the back and forth.
Yeah, thank you, man. No, education isn't just in the classroom. Most of my teachers were not my teachers. I said I didn't really like my teachers. So what you're doing with this is an educational platform. And I'm very curious as you get these leaders on to ask about the education system, because I have a lot of thoughts on that too. And I'm always an open book about how we can get the education system better. You're mentioning Finland and everything. Like, if we can fix education, obviously I'm biased, but if we can fix education, I think we can fix a lot of problems that we all agree on. So it's been really nice to have you on. And I appreciate you bringing on a school teacher to talk about this stuff, because I think it's important. And the more people that hear about what I'm doing, then the more pushback I get, which is good because it'll get me closer to the truth too. So
next episode, we'll have you on to talk about the actual education system. I think that'll be a fascinating conversation. And in fact, we have a lot of folks that are in the audience and people that have come on the show before that are pretty influential in that arena. So I think that conversation back and forth will be good. Before we quickly run, what's your podcast called and where can people find you?
Cylinder Radio. And the idea is that it's like a three-dimensional, like from one standpoint, like, or from one viewpoint, it's a circle. There we go. No, there we go. And then from one standpoint, it's from another viewpoint, it's a rectangle. So you have people arguing, like I mentioned, the abortion issue. So what I do is I bring on people from various viewpoints to discuss, and I bring them on individually. So I focus on just their point of view, but then I bring it on just so we understand that these issues are complex. It's called Cylinder Radio. And on Instagram, it's just my name, Will, Reusch.
There's the dork. The dork has finally come out. He's revealed the cylinder radio, and for anybody that's listening, we just had a demonstration of Will's water bottle and how it demonstrates the shift in perspective. So thank you, sir. I appreciate you.
Cool. Thanks. Appreciate it too, Manu.
And that's another conversation in the books. Will Reusch, thank you for your time. Man, we went everywhere from if Donald Trump was your student, what would you teach him? If Joe Biden was your student, what would you want him to take away? To those GOP debates just happened. Where do we stand? What's missing in our educational system? If you enjoy that conversation, remember, leave a like. If you're on YouTube, rate the episode. If you're on Spotify and Apple, it helps a lot because we've got a hopeful majority to build. And we need all of us to build it because remember, nuance is under attack because people like us stay quiet, and it's time for us to get loud about the need to have nuanced, productive, open-minded conversation. Remember, the divide in our politics is not left-right, but it's between temperament, mindset, whether we want to be open-minded or closed-minded. So every week, Mondays, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, where you get your content. I'll see you in episode 14 next week.